I got introduced to Bleach back in 2007 by a friend who was really into Gundam, and in hindsight it was probably his fault I got that much into anime to begin with. It might have been in the middle of my high school exam period, but that didn't stop me from watching the show instead of studying, for better or worse. The show got brought to my attention by an AMV he showed, not even a serious one of its fights, but a more comedic one focusing on the side character Don Kanonji. So my expectations for the show were completely off for what I ended up watching. I expected a purely comedy-focused show, but what I got was so much more. The story of Ichigo Kurosaki, a boy who could see ghosts turn Shinigami, might not be the most original premise, not even back then. Hell, Shaman King did the boy who sees ghosts take a few years prior, and was responsible for my interest in anime to begin with. But when I got to episode 5, and the ending where the serial killer horror that got sent to hell stuck with me and got me deeply invested. This series was far more darker and serious than anything I had ever seen up to this point, and 16-year-old me was blown away. And the episodes after this, the memories in the rain arc, about the death of Ichigo's mother, and him blaming himself for her death, remain some of my favorite parts of the entire story, even hundreds of episodes and chapters later. Even now I feel that the first 10 episodes, with how well they were executed, and the respective manga chapters are some of the better ones the story has, and I personally would not have minded if the story didn't escalate out of the human world the way it did. But then, we got the Soul Society arc. The one arc that both haters and fans of the series will stand by being absolutely amazing. And, I can't add more to it, the arc really is amazing, and to this day is still peak shonen anime. We get introduced to the expansive cast of the 13 Guard divisions, a heap of interesting characters all with their own intentions and relations to each other. All of them have great designs standing out in their own way. And the fights are plenty and intense, all building up to the twist at the end of the arc, which is still great to this day. But this is usually where the praise for the series stops. The anime got subjected to 50 episodes of filler, about as much episodes as the series has been until this point. A quick explanation for any newer anime watchers: back 10 years ago, most big shonen anime went on indefinitely, but they either got an anime original end, or they got subjected to dozens of filler episodes, adding absolutely nothing to the plot progression. Unlike what studios do nowadays with big name shows like My Hero Academia, Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, giving them a season every other year. And the manga started the Erangel arc, which is afterwards often cited as a redo of the Soul Society arc but worse. I personally don't agree, I still enjoy the arc a lot, but thanks to more filler happening I do have to agree that it did drag on for a very long time. The introduction of devices and the cool designs of the Erangel brought some interesting things to the table. It is also fair to point out that in a later interview Kubo made it clear that he initially didn't plan to go past the Soul Society arc, and likely ending it there, which might explain the more rocky progression of what came afterwards. However, thinking about it, I do find it commendable. I can't imagine it being easy to come up with a coherent story on the spot, a story that goes on for over a decade even. The man would have benefited of taking a year off before continuing the story, but mangaka often do not get that luxury sadly. The first few episodes of this new arc were pretty compelling in my eyes. Ichigo is quite literally struggling with his inner demons at this point, and his friends need to pick themselves together as they are being faced by their inability to help Ichigo, or even protect themselves. Perhaps not the best written character drama, but it is still done pretty well. It is also worth pointing out, the soundtrack for Bleach remains one of the best out there, even all these years later. From the melancholic tunes of Nothing Can Be Explained and On the Precipice of Defeat, to the Spanish tunes of the Erangel arc and the orchestrated tracks from the movies being used in later episodes. Shiro Sakisu's music is amazing and memorable all around, and many shonen anime wish they had it this good. Even the openings are great, with one or two offenders which I don't enjoy that much. The endings sadly are more of a mixed bag, and the second ending remains my clear favourite. Alongside the anime airing, movies also got made, as is common with popular series. However, I personally found the movies didn't add much to the narrative. Sure, they had everyone to watch something for about an hour, but the quality of each of them varies wildly. The last one is considered so bad that Kubo himself only liked one scene of the movie, and that was the reanimated fight between Ichigo and Ulquiorra. But hey, at least the soundtrack of these got reused in the anime. However, as the anime went on and was faced with more filler in the middle of the Erangel arc, the general consensus on the series soured a little bit. Luckily, unlike the first big filler arc, they are completely unconnected from the main story, but it still have big gaps in its pacing. The fights kept going, and in true shonen fashion went on for multiple episodes, so yeah, you don't want the filler season to start in the middle of that. The fights themselves are plenty, but in varying quality. Some are great, some are not. Misaki vs. Findorf fight for some reason had amazing animation to it. And Kira's fight, the brutal and matter-of-fact way the fight ended left me speechless. Even upon re-watching, it still gave me chills. The fights against the Espada were great, with some exceptions, and Ichigo's fights did have him lose a lot at first, before winning later, even though I'm aware nowadays that this is a staple in shonen anime. Says Sapporo, however, his fight dragged on way too long, and Yami? He just kinda existed, and then he got taken care of off-screen by Kenpachi and Byakuya. I'm still sad about not seeing that fight though. The story continued, the filler kept happening, and eventually Aizen was defeated in perhaps the best fight of the entire series, and this is perhaps the point where the series should have ended, or at least the anime. I was conflicted on Aizen just being locked away. This would have been the perfect ending point. At this point I started reading the manga, because I just had to know what was going to happen. And like clockwork, the anime went into another filler season. What followed in the manga, however, was the decisive Fullbringer arc. I'll be honest, I never hated the Fullbringer story, but I was in the minority back then. Everyone hated it and said it was the worst part yet and that the series was done for. Until recent years. Now people are saying it's actually misunderstood and one of the best parts of the entire series. Personally, I like to return to the more grounded roots of the series, but with how the story had evolved by this point, I feel it was too late for a story to be done in this way. The stakes were too high before and seemingly too low now. Perhaps this kind of arc would have worked better before the initial trip to Soul Society, alas, we'll never know. I've seen some rumors here and there that Kubo had said that he had this arc in mind and wanted to do it at an earlier point, perhaps even after Soul Society, but I'm taking that with a grain of salt. It would have at least explained Chad and Ohimi's powers a lot earlier. But we know that initially Kubo didn't even plan the Soul Society arc out concretely, so who knows really. However, one thing I didn't like was how fast things were resolved at the end of the arc, in a handful of chapters. But there seemed to be some pressure from Weekly Jump telling Kubo to get on the next big arc. It did give us one great fight for Kenpachi though, where he just stomps the opponent in a split second. No nonsense, no fucking around here. The anime was following the manga very closely in its weekly release at this point, and after the Fullbringer story was done, the anime caught up and stopped. It was a weird realization. The show I'd been watching for years on end at this point just stopped. No filler this time, for better or worse. But no more Bleach was also a sad thing. Probably for the better in the end, there was no more endless amounts of filler to ruin its reputation any further. The anime stopped, leaving a weird void behind. At this point a lot of the general audience stopped paying attention to it. And a few years later the manga reached its slightly rushed end, most likely thanks to the publisher. The ending left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. People went back to saying, well, it was the worst of the big three anyways, and Bleach was always bad. And so the series went dark for the better part of a decade. It got some novels and a gacha game, but that was about it. And Bleach, as we knew, was done. Until 2 years ago, an announcement was made for a new Bleach anime to adapt the final story arc, and later that year a special one-shot was released, hinting at a potential big health-focused story, which I'm still waiting and hoping for to be a new sequel series. In anticipation for the new anime, I ended up binge-watching the entire anime again, together with my girlfriend who had never seen it before, but wanted to see it as well. I was reminded of how great the soundtrack was, and how stylish the overall character designs were. And the story, while not a masterpiece in storytelling, is one hell of a fun ride. I also found out that if you don't watch the filler, Bleach is surprisingly short all things considered. It was great seeing all the characters again after all these years. The mysterious and cool Urahara, but sometimes too silly to take serious. Renji, the rival to Ichigo, being clowned on and instantly losing all his fights in later parts. Ikaku and Kenpachi, who at first seemed nothing more than thrill-seeking warriors, but later on revealed to have more nuance to them, probably some of my favorite characters in the entire series as well. Shinji, the leader of the outcast Vizard with his shit-eating grin. And Aizen, the seemingly unbeatable mastermind, always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. It felt like reuniting with friends after 10 years, and I had forgotten how much I liked them. Back in October, the first part of the new anime aired, and fans loved it, and it got praised pretty much everywhere. And we're now a bit more than a month away from the second part. Bleach is back, and better than ever, and people are loving it. For the time being that is, as I have read the manga, and I'm sure the opinions are going to change when the anime is done. I won't go into manga spoilers here though, rest assured. But with some luck, they flesh out the ending a bit more, or change some things, as Kubo himself is working together closely with the animation team. We are even on track to get some new fights at round in the manga for the second part it seems, so that is pretty great to hear. But for now, I will enjoy Bleach's return to the spotlight, regardless of how it will go down in history. And it is nice seeing everyone enjoy and praise the return of the anime all these years later. Bleach might not be a masterpiece, but I will always love it.